It all kicked off at a depressingly quiet funeral. Ray stood there staring at his parents' headstones, leaking tears like a broken faucet. A crowd was hovering nearby, but he didn't give a single damn. The memory of that disaster ripped open like a fresh wound. He pictured himself sprinting toward his old man in total panic, finally seeing how wrecked he really was. The guy, barely whispering, told him to go have a happy life right before the whole place went boom in his face. Ray spun around and, surprise, found his mother looking extremely dead on the ground. Pure misery hit him hard, but it pivoted into a massive, blinding rage real fast. Horrid screams tore out of him as something inside his head finally snapped. His magic decided to show up in the most violent way possible, blasting a giant dome of energy that neighbors could see from space. Once the juice ran out, the dome collapsed, leaving everything inside looking like a cheap winter postcard. He just sat there cradling his mother's corpse with a heart made of lead. Fast forward a bit, and Ray shows up at the fancy Magic Academy, the place where he's supposed to learn how to not blow things up. He was just wandering around aimlessly, looking like a lost puppy. That's when some girl slammed into him, almost sending him to the pavement. He caught her hand by instinct just so she wouldn't eat dirt. She turned bright red, and Ray apologized for being the clueless new guy on campus. Her friends were lurking nearby, whispering like they were in a bad teen drama. They'd been warned that some random kid was joining their elite little club. But they were shocked he wasn't some rich brat or the son of a legendary wizard who owns half the kingdom. Once the girl realized Ray was a nobody with zero bloodline, she stormed off looking pretty annoyed. Ray just stood there, completely baffled by her sudden mood swing. Then some jerk started yelling at him from across the way. This was Albert, and he used a tone that screamed, "I'm better than you." He wondered aloud how a peasant like Ray even got past the front gates. He made it clear that Ray was about as welcome as a fart in a crowded elevator. Ray ignored the insults and dodged when Albert tried to shove him like a bully. The guy went red with rage and got ready to swing. But a scary, firm voice shut the whole thing down. It was Amelia. The other students scattered like roaches when they saw her coming, mostly because her family is powerful enough to erase their entire bloodlines. She told Albert to stop acting like a child and leave the new guy alone. He stomped away, looking like he might cry. Amelia walked up to Ray and actually acted like a human being, apologizing for the idiot. She confessed she was surprised to see a normal person here too, which is a backhanded compliment. But she figured he must have some hidden mojo to have made the cut. She told him to hit her up if he needed someone to hold his hand. Ray felt a bit better and gave her a genuine thanks for the assist. A bit later, the whole student body shoved into the hall for the boring opening speech. The principal, Abel, welcomed them with a vibe that said, "Don't mess up," reminding everyone they were chosen for a reason. He told them not to get lazy or they'd be kicked out. Basically, work your butt off or stay a loser forever. He mentioned that being rich doesn't mean you're actually good at throwing fireballs. Then he brought out the student rep, and to the shock of absolutely no one, it was Amelia. She gave a standard speech about teamwork, telling everyone to play nice and study their brains out. Later on, Ray finally got tossed into his actual class. He admitted he was just a regular guy from nowhere, which went over like a lead balloon, but promised to try hard anyway. A few kids felt bad for him, but Albert looked like he wanted to vomit from the sheer audacity. The teacher saw the drama brewing and told everyone to sit their butts down. Amelia waved at Ray, and he gave her a polite little nod back. The gossip mill started spinning immediately. Everyone wondered why the Ice Queen was being nice. Ray started zoning out looking at the birds outside, so the professor chucked a piece of chalk at his skull. Ray caught it, but the thing exploded and left him looking like he fought a powdered donut. The teacher yelled at him for being a space cadet and went back to the boring lecture. He explained there are 5 ranks of sorcerers, and everyone wants the gold medal at the top. Only 7 people in history have actually managed to reach that peak. They call them the superior sorcerers. Apparently, they're all super mysterious and probably antisocial. The headmistress is one, another is a nerd named Carol, and then there's the frozen sorcerer who basically soloed a whole war in the East while everyone else was eating lunch. Albert interrupted again, asking why this peasant boy was allowed to breathe the same air as them. The teacher snapped back that Ray passed the entrance exams, so his family tree was irrelevant compared to his actual skill. He went back to explaining that magic is basically just coding reality. You think it, squeeze the energy, and then boom, you've got a physical object. Amelia asked if there was a ceiling to what a person could actually build. The professor said no, it just depends on how much gas you have in the tank. But you have to stick to the 4 states of matter, otherwise you're just showing off. Anything else is just a weird phenomenon that shouldn't happen. Some smartypants asked about the legendary antimatter. The teacher said nobody uses that because it's basically impossible. Ray was too busy staring at a specific girl who didn't seem to fit in with the other snobs. Then it was finally time to actually use magic. Amelia got a standing ovation for her skills, while Ray got laughed at for casting spells that looked like a toddler's birthday party trick. Another student looked like he wanted to file a formal complaint that a commoner was ruining the vibe. After class, Ray walked up to that mysterious girl he'd been creepily watching earlier. He mentioned her book and bragged that he actually knew the person who wrote it. The girl looked shocked and said her name was Elissa. Ray told her she was talented and that he wanted to learn everything that was hidden inside those pages. Elissa was stunned to find a fellow nerd and finally pulled her hood back. Ray complimented her hair and asked why she was hiding under a giant blanket. She got all awkward and looked at the floor. Turns out she has elf ears, and people are generally jerks about that kind of thing. Ray told her they were cool and that she should stop being so self-conscious. She blushed like a beet, and they spent the rest of the time geeking out over books and magic. That night, Ray finally found his dorm room to see who he'd be stuck with. The roommate was Evie, and he didn't care that Ray looked like he shopped at a thrift store. He just wanted to see if Ray was legit. They shook hands to seal the deal. Both of them were surprised by the other's grip strength. Evie grinned, glad he wasn't rooming with a complete weakling. The next morning, Ray was up at the crack of dawn to go for a run. He bumped into a girl who was also a morning person, which was weird because normal students are usually hungover or asleep. She said her name was Rebecca Bradley, and she already knew exactly who he was. Since everyone was gossiping about the average kid at the magic school, Ray was happy to be famous for once and went back to his cardio. Later, he was chatting with Evie, who was acting like a total fanboy. He thought Ray was the man, mainly because Rebecca is from one of those families that basically owns the world. He reminded Ray that the other girl, Amelia, was a big deal too. She was basically the perfect student that everyone wanted to be, while Ray, who was raised in the sticks, didn't understand the hierarchy at all and left to find the professor while tripping over his own feet. Another girl slammed into him and he apologized, but she was way too high energy and introduced herself as Clara, though Ray admitted he had no idea who her parents were. After a few words, it turned out Ray was actually a bit of a natural ladies' man. He eventually made it to the principal's office and stood there stiff as a board like a soldier. The principal laughed and told him to stop being so weird and take a seat. She joked that he looked exactly like his father, which is usually a bad sign. Then he saw a family photo on her desk that looked surprisingly familiar. Later on, during fencing class, Ray had to spar with Albert. The audience was talking trash, and Albert came at him like a raging bull. Ray sidestepped and put his blade right against the guy's throat, making Albert look like a complete amateur in front of everyone. Humiliated, the jerk tried to attack again, but Ray blocked it before the kid could break the furniture. The whole class went silent, and the principal watched from the balcony, looking pleased that Ray was actually enjoying his day. She whispered the name, Sorcerer of the Frozen Edge. A few days later, Ray decided to join a couple of different clubs. First up was the Location Investigation Club. He walked in and found a bunch of meatheads hanging out. They told him he looked too weak to join their club since they only want people who are built like tanks. Ray didn't say a word, he just took off his shirt and showed off a six-pack that made them all feel insecure. The leader was stunned and asked if he had one of those rare Golden Hunter cards. Ray casually mentioned that he'd already cleared the test for it. The room went quiet because only the top-tier pros actually carry one of those. The leader welcomed him to the team immediately after that. Next, Ray headed over to check out a second club that was the complete opposite of the last one. The club was strictly girls only and focused entirely on keeping plants alive. The girls seemed pretty shocked to see a guy, but Rebecca didn't see any reason to call security. However, Dina stood up looking grumpy, claiming he was just trying to flirt with the boss. Rebecca decided to let Dina play judge, jury, and executioner. If Ray could actually handle the grunt work, he was officially in. Dina dragged him to a depressing, abandoned rooftop and pointed at a patch of dirt. The place was a jungle of weeds, and she told him he had exactly 7 days to clear it all out by himself. Ray just nodded and started pulling weeds like a man possessed. For the next few days, he was out there wrestling grass, prepping the soil and playing gardener. He even got fancy with it, adding stone blocks to make the place look like an actual garden instead of a wasteland. One afternoon, Rebecca swung by with some snacks to keep him from starving. Ray took the food and they had a little heart-to-heart. She dropped the bomb that she wasn't just the club leader and a rich kid, but she also ran the entire student council. Ray thought she was probably one minor inconvenience away from a total burnout. Right then, some obnoxious clanking broke their concentration. Down below, 2 guys were hitting each other with sticks. Rebecca mentioned they were getting ready for the big academy tournament, where they'd eventually crown the king of the magic nerds. She asked if he was going to sign up, and he said he'd need to sleep on it first. As he talked, Rebecca was busy staring at his gains and moving way too close. Meanwhile, Amelia and a few others were spying through the glass like a bunch of creepers. 4 days later, Ray revealed his masterpiece of a garden to the club. The girls were floored by how clean it was and finally gave him the official member badge. Later, the principal called him in to hand over a secret letter about a potential rat in the kingdom. Suspecting a spy on campus, she asked Ray to go undercover and help sniff out the traitor. He took the gig and immediately bumped into Clarice, who was busy staring at some bugs. Ray mentioned he liked insects too and suggested they should geek out about them later. Clarice was thrilled since she had 0 friends and quickly agreed to the date. He gave her a random compliment and she turned redder than a ripe tomato. The next morning in class, the teacher put Ray on the spot to explain spell types. He stood up and gave a masterclass on every category and method like he wrote the textbook. The class sat there in total shock, while the teacher basically called him a perfect student. But before they left, the teacher announced a field trip to the woods where they had to form squads of 4. Ray was worried he'd be the last pick for dodgeball, but Ebby showed up to save him. Ray hesitated since Ebby's magic was kind of pathetic, but the guy claimed he was a gold hunter. Ray let him join and then spotted Elise sitting alone, so he went to recruit her too. She was being shy, so Ray grabbed her face and told her to stop being so insecure. Suddenly, Amelia waltzed over and asked for the last spot, which Ray obviously didn't turn down. The entire room was staring at this bizarre dream team of misfits and elites. The next day, everyone was at the forest edge while the teacher explained the game. They had to race to the center to grab a special flag like a game of capture the flag. They also had to hunt for stamps along the way if they wanted to actually score points. He gave them 24 hours to finish before they were considered losers. As soon as the whistle blew, the teams vanished into the trees and the chaos started. While they were moving, the main guy realized his team was moving like turtles. Then a massive, nightmare-inducing bee showed up to ruin their afternoon hike. Without blinking, she charged in and ended the bug's life with a single brutal swing. She thought it was a bit of a letdown as she watched the monster hit the dirt. The squad kept moving and found their first stamp, which boosted their egos right before the sun went down and they had to camp out. They sat around the fire talking about how they hadn't died yet. Amelia looked genuinely shocked that her weird teammates weren't completely useless. Ray was sitting off to the side and decided to speak up. He mentioned growing up in the middle of nowhere, so these scary woods felt like a playground compared to his childhood home. Ebby mentioned he couldn't believe a high-class girl like Amelia was hanging with them, since her family basically has their faces on the local currency. The girl got serious and said she didn't give a damn about fancy titles or bloodlines. She only respected people who actually worked for their spot instead of being born into it. Being a noble was never something she actually cared about in the first place. She admitted she liked them because they treated her like a person instead of a walking bank account. She thanked them for being normal and asked Ray if he thought they could actually win. That question gave Ray a flashback to his dad, saying the exact same thing years ago. He remembered real battlefields that made this forest look like a luxury vacation resort. After they finished their campfire chat, they finally decided to get some sleep. But Ray stayed awake, staring at the stars and overthinking everything. He kept hearing his old teacher's voice echoing in his head, telling him to stay under the radar if he wanted to live a quiet, boring life. But if he found people he could actually trust, He should probably stop lying to them. He wondered if these people were actually worth revealing his giant secret to. The next morning, they heard a scream that sounded like someone was having a very bad day. Ray ran over and found a monster that had snatched up some of Albert's idiot friends. He didn't think twice before jumping into the fray. He used a speed spell to dodge around and then buried his sword in the monster's skull before offering Albert a hand up. Albert was a total jerk about it, claiming he had the situation under control the whole time. Albert's other buddies showed up, and Ray told them to get their friends out of the cages. Amelia was standing there in disbelief that Ray had just soloed a giant beast. She walked up and asked him who the hell he actually was. But before he could come up with a lie, a creepy guy in a hood appeared and used some dark mojo to reboot the dead monster. The creature woke up with glowing tattoos and looked significantly angrier than before. Ray got ready for round 2 just as Clarice showed up to watch the show. He tried to hit it, but the monster was blocking everything like it was a pro. It was way too strong for him. Ray was starting to sweat, but luckily his team finally decided to stop being spectators. They used fire to blind it and then hit it with a wind spell that knocked it off balance. Ray saw the opening and slashed the thing in half, finally ending the fight for good this time. He took a breather and thanked his team for actually helping out for once. Clarice just stood there silently, looking a bit intimidated by Ray's raw power. The hooded creep had already vanished into thin air like a coward, leaving everyone feeling pretty on edge about the whole situation. Since the monster was dead, they finished the race and grabbed all the stamps they needed. Ray apologized to his group for training too hard and forgot they weren't all super soldiers. He'd been pushing a pace that most normal humans would find physically impossible. Later, the teachers gave them a gold star and moved them to the top of the class. But Ray noticed that half the class was giving him the stink eye for being so good. Amelia and Evie saw him looking down and told him to just ignore the haters. They said people were just salty because they weren't on his level yet. A few days later, Ray went to visit his old mentor again, the woman he was thinking about during that night in the woods. He walked in with a smile and greeted her by her name. Lydia. The teacher looked shocked because she hadn't seen his face in a long time. She asked him how he was liking his new life as a student. Ray said he was still trying to figure out how to be a normal kid. He still hadn't managed to activate his real magic, but Lydia told him to relax since that takes years. She reminded him that he was carrying the legacy of the frozen sorcerer that she gave him. He just needed to be a bit more patient. Ray listened like a good student, and then Lydia told him some really dark news. She explained that magic doesn't come from codes, but from the brain's ability to imagine things into existence. She'd been sending her notes to the higher-ups, and now everyone was trying to steal them. Because knowing the source of magic is basically like having the keys to the universe. She warned him that a dangerous group was on the hunt. They were kidnapping magic users and doing some really messed up experiments on them. They call themselves researchers, but they're really just high-tech torturers. They even tried to recruit her, so she told Ray to watch his back and keep an eye on his friends to make sure none of them were secretly working for the bad guys. After they finished talking, they took a walk through the trees and talked about the good old days. Lydia thanked him for coming by to see her. Since she was feeling a bit nostalgic lately, she asked if he'd finally made any real friends, and he told her about the half-elf girl who was obsessed with her work. Lydia gave him a smile and told him to drag those friends over for a meet and greet, since he was actually looking happy for once. She realized it had been ages since she'd seen him crack a smile before they finally had to wrap things up and say their goodbyes. She threw out a casual reminder that the Magic Sword tournament was coming up fast. Since she'd personally crushed it 4 times, she thought Ray should probably go give it a shot. But he just sat there thinking and decided he'd much rather stay invisible and not become the school's main attraction. Lydia got the hint, so they just hung out for the rest of the day until the sun started to set on them. Before Ray took off, she handed him a book as a little parting gift. He actually seemed touched and thanked her for the new reading material. The next morning, Ray was back at his usual routine of running until his lungs burned. He tripped over Elise, who was looking like a nervous wreck while juggling a mountain of library books. Ray flashed a grin and realized she looked like she was about to drop everything. He figured she shouldn't be playing pack mule alone, so he offered to walk with her and carry the heavy stuff. She finally caved and let him help. But then she decided she needed a quick wardrobe change first. A bit later, she walked out in a white dress, and Ray didn't even try to play it cool, immediately bombarding her with compliments. The sudden praise made her jittery, though she was secretly digging the fact that someone was actually paying attention. After the fashion show, the two of them finally made it to the library. Once there, Alyssa grabbed a book written by Leisure. It was the exact one about brain research that they were geeking out over earlier. Ray took a look at the cover and told her she had pretty good taste in literature. While he was busy getting sucked into a novel, Elias got curious and asked why he liked that stuff. Ray explained with a straight face that he liked reading about feelings because he basically had the emotional range of a rock himself. Learning how normal people deal with their drama through a book was a major win for him, but as they were leaving, they spotted Clarice lurking in the shadows like a total weirdo. Ray somehow teleported behind her and said hey like it was totally normal. And then he had the audacity to invite her to go grab some food with them. She looked like she wanted to evaporate from embarrassment, but eventually she said yes. Once they got to the cafeteria, Ray acted like a proper host and introduced the two girls. But he started listing off every single thing he liked about them, making the poor girls want to crawl under the table. They admitted they'd never actually gone out to eat with friends before, and Ray just smiled, admitting that he was also a total amateur at this social stuff. Later on, after dropping them off, Ray saw a fancy carriage pull up and watched Amelia step out looking like royalty. He didn't waste any time and went over to chat, mentioning he'd been hanging with Alyssa and Clarice but was now bored and alone. Amelia felt a sharp sting of jealousy because she wasn't thrilled about him spending his whole day with other girls. She looked him in the eye and suggested they go do something where it was just the two of them. Ray was down for it, so they ended up going on a shopping spree to find her some new clothes. Amelia tried on a million different outfits, and every time she walked out, Ray hit her with a fresh wave of praise while staring like a hawk. While she was swapping dresses, she finally asked why Ray was so smooth with other girls but acted so weird whenever she was around. Ray took a second to think and figured it probably had something to do with how he was raised in the woods, since he grew up constantly surrounded by a literal army of women. Amelia was about to say something back when a spider decided to crash her dressing room party. She freaked out and sprinted out of the room, slamming right into Ray's chest. She realized she wasn't exactly fully dressed, turned purple and scrambled back inside to hide. Ray felt like a total creep and started apologizing for the awkward view. Amelia acted like it was no big deal while her heart was racing. She started thinking that Ray might be the only person who sees her for who she actually is without a filter. The next day, Ray got a visit the principal card from his teacher. She wanted to make sure the local rich kids weren't giving him too much trouble for being a commoner. Rosho mentioned she noticed he was actually doing great and had managed to find a decent crew to roll with, which was something Ray admitted he was actually starting to like about this place. The teacher told him that in her years of dealing with kids, she'd seen way too many people just give up on themselves. Some could have been legends, but they let their own insecurities turn them into nobodies. And as a teacher, that thought honestly made her want to cry. She told Ray she wasn't going to let him become just another tragic story. She made it clear that if he ever got into a jam, she'd have his back. Ray thanked her for the pep talk and realized he finally had some teachers who weren't complete jerks. That night, while students were wondering where Albert had vanished to, the guy was in the woods throwing a temper tantrum. He was surrounded by flames that he'd summoned out of pure spite. The hooded creep was watching from a tree, looking like he was enjoying the show. The next day, after finishing his chores, Ray went to the gardening club since he finally had the keys to the kingdom. Everything was chill until he opened a door and walked right in on Rebecca while she was half naked, making them both turn various shades of red. He slammed the door shut and apologized for having eyes that work. They met up a minute later, both feeling like they wanted to die from the awkwardness. Ray tried to change the subject by asking about the ancient-looking book she was carrying around. Rebecca explained it was basically the club's holy Bible for plants. She'd been writing down secret theories about how magic and nature were basically doing a weird dance together. Ray turned into a total fanboy instantly, and Rebecca got excited that someone actually cared about her nerd hobbies. She took him to the garden and started explaining how carnivorous plants are basically just biological mages. Ray was blown away and begged her to teach him everything she knew. Rebecca was loving it because usually everyone just avoids her because they're scared of her family's reputation. Ray didn't give a damn and even borrowed the book so he could go home and study like a giant geek. Rebecca asked one last time if he was going to join the tournament, but he still said no. The next day, Ray watched Amelia absolutely wreck some other girl in a sparring match. The teacher asked if she was done, but she wasn't. Instead, Amelia pointed her sword at Ray and challenged him to a fight. He was caught off guard, but figured a little practice wouldn't hurt anyone, as long as it stayed a friendly match and he didn't have to enter that stupid tournament. Amelia said she wanted to see what he was really made of after seeing him go beast mode in the forest. Then they finally got down to business. Ray noticed that while she wasn't a heavy hitter, she was moving like a blur. But despite her speed, he was parrying everything like he was playing on easy mode. Amelia was getting more frustrated by the second. She couldn't wrap her head around how a non-magical kid was this good with a piece of steel. Ray started having flashbacks to his brutal training sessions back home. His body just moved on its own, dodging her strike and getting ready to end the match. But out of nowhere, an electric shock fried his nervous system, making him drop his sword and hit the floor. He forced a smile though and told her it was a good game, handing the win to Amelia just to keep things civil. Meanwhile, Albert was in the corner fuming because Ray was still getting all the attention. Later, Evie asked Ray where the hell he learned to fight like a medieval John Wick. He told her he had a master who basically treated him like a punching bag until he got good. He explained that his childhood was so intense that being at this academy felt like he was on a permanent vacation. While they were chatting, Albert showed up looking for a fight and challenged Ray to a duel. Ray said fine, and a bunch of kids followed them to a back alley where they threw up a barrier to hide the noise. Ray asked if there were any rules he should know about. Albert tossed him a sharp sword and said everything goes until someone cries uncle or passes out. Before he even finished the sentence, Albert lunged at him like he was trying to score a kill. Ray stayed sharp and stepped out of the way of the blade. He held his ground, though he thought it was weird that Albert was acting like a total psycho. On the other side, Albert was having a mental breakdown, thinking he was about to murder his own dad. Neither of them realized the hooded guy was watching the whole thing from the shadows. Albert started trauma dumping about his childhood and how his family was the bottom of the noble barrel. They were basically the peasants of the rich world. He talked about how his dad was a total pushover and why he had to be the one to restore their family honor by becoming a god. Lost in his rage, Albert started spamming fire spells at Ray, who just swatted them away with his sword like they were annoying flies. Panicking because his magic wasn't doing squat, Albert decided to bet it all on one final move and summoned a massive fire dragon. Ray didn't even flinch, he just sliced through the beast and made it pop like a balloon. Albert stared in disbelief because his ultimate move didn't even scratch the guy. He collapsed into a pile of tears and finally gave up the fight. Ray went back to his friends, but they were all looking at him like he was some kind of alien. He was about to come clean when suddenly a sleep spell hit the room, knocking everyone out cold. Ray felt the magic hit and looked up to see a very familiar face. It was his teacher, who pulled off her hood and gave him a creepy smile while talking about a greater purpose. It turned out she was part of some sick cult that experimented on people's brains, and her whole backstory was complete garbage. She'd just been using the students as lab rats to recruit more bodies for her weird science project. She started laughing, showing off her glowing eye and bragging about how Albert's ego made him the perfect target for her. Ray realized he'd have to explain things later, because right now he had to deal with this crazy lady. She'd been rounding up high-tier students like they were rare trading cards. The plan was to trade them in for a promotion and some street cred within her cult. Turns out that whole caring teacher vibe was just a very convincing Halloween costume. Ray gets ready to scrap, but the teacher backs off because she knows he's a beast at close range. She summons a pair of fire snakes, but he just weaves past them and keeps moving forward. Seeing him close the gap, she tries to pivot and aim the snakes at his defenseless friends. Ray remembers Lydia's advice about timing and finally lets the beast out, summoning the Chronos key to build a massive ice wall while his hair and eyes go full anime Protagonist. The teacher looks terrified as he pulls out 6 ice swords that belong to some ancient legend. He basically confirms he's the new owner of that terrifying legacy. Naturally, she gets mad and summons a giant black dragon. claiming that even the world's best sorcerer couldn't kill her pet. Rei just types in an antimatter code, and the dragon gets deleted from reality instantly. The teacher tries to run like a coward, but Rei pins her foot to the floor with an ice sword and sends her face first into the dirt. She starts begging for her life, promising to introduce him to the cool kids in her sect. But she's obviously lying through her teeth to distract him. She tosses a fire pillar at him that does absolutely nothing to his health bar. He points his blades at her and says he won't kill her, but the government is going to make her life miserable. She scoffs and shoves a weird magical artifact directly into her own brain. She starts mutating and bragging that this is her ultimate science project, and now she can finally win. And then the real fight finally begins. The brainwashed students finally snap out of it and run for cover. She starts spamming fire, but Rei just cancels her out with a few lines of code. He gives her a quick lesson on why ice is better than fire. Fire just makes things bigger and louder until they eventually burn out. Ice is about slowing things down and being precise, which requires a level of skill she clearly lacks. Now she's tilted and tries to use a mind control spell on him. Rei's swords just shatter the spell like glass, and he lands a hit that makes his own weapon explode. His whole body gets covered in ice, which definitely freaks out the people watching. The teacher just laughs at him, asking if he even knows how to drive that much power. Rei responds by summoning a localized ice tornado that turns her into a human popsicle. With the win secured, he locks the Chronos key back up and his hair goes back to normal. He collapses with blood on his face just as his friends start running over to him. He can barely see a thing, but he's just happy that they're all still breathing. Lydia picks him up and explains to the crew that she found this kid wandering alone near a war zone. They were going to figure out what to do with him later, but Saladin mentioned the kid is legally a nobody. The village he came from isn't on any map, so he doesn't actually belong to any country. A few hours later, Lydia hears the kid is awake and she sprints over to see him. The protagonist finally tells her his name, but for the next few days, he just repeats names like a parrot. Then the girls have to meet with the big boss Colonel to decide if the kid gets a future or a cage. Carol wants to keep him as a pet project, while others want to dump him at an orphanage. The kid is actually listening to the whole conversation through the door. Lydia walks up and asks him what he actually wants for himself. He finally speaks a full sentence and says he wants to stay with her. She gives him a magical blessing and tells the Colonel she's taking full custody of the boy. She promises to handle his training and take the blame if he accidentally levels a city. The Colonel sees something weird in the kid's eyes and says okay, letting her play teacher for the next 6 years until he's ready for the big leagues. He joins the army and starts using Melee's power to survive a non-stop string of brutal battles. They wipe out a group of enemies and move on to the next one, not noticing that they're being watched by 2 guys hiding in the bushes. The spies are totally weirded out that a literal child is a one-man army. The Colonel breaks the news that 2 high-level mages just got permanently retired in the fight. From that point on, the war gets way sweatier and everyone starts looking over their shoulders, making it crystal clear that nobody here has plot armor. Rei is offered a chance to quit and go home, but he decides to stay because he thinks these soldiers are his actual family. He tells them he loves them like brothers and would happily die for them, which makes everyone feel awkward. A soldier named Hotwa promises to protect Rei if things get hairy during the next mission. But of course, Rei has to watch Hotwa get taken out right in front of him. Pure rage takes over, and he basically redlines his power to the absolute maximum. He doesn't even remember the part where he probably committed several war crimes. Back in reality, Rei wakes up on a hospital bed feeling like garbage. Lydia tells him she saw him use the secret stash of power and says he'll learn to control it eventually. She leaves and tells him to come find her once he's done playing patient. The director mentions that the principal didn't even want Rei to come to this school at first. Lydia had to beg for him to get in so he could actually talk to people his own age and maybe find a hobby that isn't murder. That emotional appeal finally worked on the principal and Rei got his student ID. He realizes that the girls have been in his corner the whole time, just hoping he can have a normal life and find whatever happiness he lost on the battlefield. Rei feels a bit emotional and promises to try his best just as his friends burst in. He tells them he's fine and decides to finally drop the secret identity. admitting he's the frozen sorcerer, one of the 7 scariest people on the planet. During the war, he got a bit too hot-headed, and his power went into overdrive, creating a massive snow dome that accidentally hurt his own teacher, along with the enemy. She explains that she's been using a Chronos key ever since, just to keep her power from fading away. Amelia finally gets why he's so bad at basic magic, but good at the hard stuff. Ray says he lied because he has too much blood on his hands to deserve actual friends. Amelia grabs his hands and says she doesn't care about his kill count, and Evie says they're bros for life. The other girls promise to stick by him, so he never has to go through that alone again. All this kindness makes him remember his old war buddies, and Hot was smile. It's a nice change of pace from all the death and destruction. That night, even Albert shows up to say sorry for being a total tool and promises to be a better person. Ray forgives him because he's a nice guy, and Albert tells him to find the strength inside him to go even further. A few days later, Ray is back at school and sees that Carol is the new substitute teacher. He goes to complain to the principal about her being on the payroll, but the principal says they were short-staffed and she's actually good at the job. Ray hates it, but Carol shows up and warns him that she's going to be very persistent and annoying. And then she starts talking about how magic is actually useful for things besides fighting. The next day, Ray watches the qualifiers to see who's representing the school. Amelia wins in 6 seconds, but looks like her brain is a million miles away. She keeps hearing her dad's voice saying that as a noble, she has to win or she's a disgrace. She knows she has to beat Arian, who is basically the final boss of the tournament. The Garden Club girls are terrified of Arian, but Amelia is trying to keep it together. Amelia takes first place in the school rankings, and Albert is right behind her, looking way too confident. The next morning, Ray finds Amelia and realizes she's about to have a nervous breakdown. He sees how stressed she is and offers to personally coach her. He gives her his secret army manual and promises to make her better than she ever thought possible. She's actually touched and agrees to start the training from hell the very next day. With only a month left, Amelia starts remembering why she's so obsessed with winning. She remembers her childhood best friend and how they promised to be close forever. But after losing once, she pushed everyone away like a typical noble drama queen. Now she knows the pressure is on and she has to break her own limits to survive. Ray shows up the next day wearing a mask and calling himself Professor White. He tells her to run 20 kilometers without using a single drop of magic. Amelia can't believe it, but she follows his lead, and they spend every waking hour training until they both smell like sweat and regret. She starts falling asleep in class because she's so exhausted, and her classmates have no idea why she's acting so weird lately. One morning, she gets woken up by a nightmare that ties right back into the main plot. She sits up and sees Ray banging on her window like a maniac, telling her she has exactly 60 seconds to get dressed and start running. Ray goes downstairs and runs into Rebecca, who is rightfully annoyed that he's at her house at 5 in the morning. He says sorry, but the girls just start laughing at how ridiculous the whole situation is, mostly because they're still in their pajamas and haven't had coffee yet. Ray gives them a compliment that makes them both feel a little awkward, and then he catches Amelia trying to sneak back to bed instead of training. Ray starts chasing after her since she got lost during class, but he finds Albert sulking alone on a bench. Walking up like he owns the place, the protagonist starts a conversation. Albert admits that despite training every single day, he feels like a weakling and has no clue how to actually get better. Ray tells him to stop crying and just keep at it, because he's going to be a total beast someday if he doesn't quit. With his ego properly inflated by Ray's pep talk, Albert finally feels some motivation. Ray keeps searching and uses his magic radar to find Amelia hiding out in the theater like a drama queen. When he finds her, he grabs her hand and tells her to get back to the grind. Later that day, he hits up the Hunters Club and tells the guys they need to help Amelia out. Knowing their buff bodies are perfect for pushing her past her limits and keeping her focused, the meatheads agree to help, and one of them hands Ray a bag, trusting him to do something useful with it instead of just losing it. He says thanks and takes the mysterious loot. Next morning, Evie sees some girl ditching class, but doesn't really care enough to follow her. Amelia is busy training when she hears a random girl cheering her on, but none of her friends can actually see who's talking. Rebecca even gets a shout-out and realizes the girl is wearing a uniform from a rival academy. He cuts her off and tells her to stop comparing her misery to other people's lives. That's because Ray put on a dress to infiltrate the girls-only school next door. While undercover, he finds a girl literally crying inside a cardboard box. He coaxes her out and finds out she's looking for her sister, Arian, and after a short walk, they find the target. Ray introduces himself to Arian, who is confused why a guy is at her academy and how he even got past the front gate. He asks her why her face and voice seem like a cheap filter. Ray reveals she's using an illusion spell, which leaves her completely stunned and speechless. She starts remembering all the rumors about how this kid is a total monster in a fight. Feeling spicy, she agrees to a quick duel. After about 2 seconds of actual effort, Arian absolutely floors the protagonist. Ray just says thanks for the beatdown and mentions he's not even entering the tournament himself. But he clarifies he's just there to level up his friend, Amelia. Arian is shocked that her old friend managed to find a guy who acts like a personal trainer. Ray says his goodbyes and warns her that Amelia is coming for her head and it's going to hurt. The next day, he rounds up the squad and decides to pay a visit to Lydia. When they arrive, everyone starts doing their formal introductions. Evie tells everyone she's basically the protagonist's right-hand woman. Lydia checks out Ray's muscles and tells him to keep being a good boy, while Elise awkwardly asks for an autograph. And Ray just signs the book without making a big deal out of it. She also talks to Clarice, who wants to be a hunter when she grows up, promising her that being a noble won't stop her from hitting things for a living. Finally, she pulls Amelia aside for a private chat because she knows she's a party animal. Meanwhile, Lidget warns Ray that some sketchy cult is making moves in the background, thinking they're planning to crash the Magic Night party and ruin everyone's weekend, so he needs to watch his back. Lydia asks Amelia how things are going, since Ray is always writing letters about school drama. She can tell something is eating at Ray, but she's not sure if she should meddle. Lydia explains she met Ray back when he was a suicidal mess with 0 reasons to live. But she managed to give him enough reasons to not jump off a cliff. He grew up surrounded by grunts, but learning how to talk to real people actually made him happy. Lydia tells Amelia to trust Ray because he's great at keeping secrets and it'll make them closer. She gets all teary-eyed and then starts the practice duel. Later at the event, Amelia fights some random new guy and absolutely smokes him, which gives her a much-needed boost to her confidence. Her next fight is against Arian, and things start off pretty even. Albert tries to defend himself, but Arian just blasts him into the stratosphere and tells him to quit. Albert remembers Ray's advice and decides to be stubborn and keep fighting. He tries to disarm her, but she just hits him with a magic wave that tosses him out of bounds for the win. Everyone is losing their minds over how fast she is, and Amelia looks like she's in trouble. Meanwhile, the main character is wandering around the hallways like he's lost. He feels someone in a mask watching him, but when he spins around, the hallway is empty. Then he runs into his hunter group leader, ending this chapter of weird encounters and fights. When he finally opens the door, he finds Carol and Lee just hanging out in there. Ray is now officially 100% confused about what's going on. Nothing about this day is making any logical sense to him. Plus, a bunch of royal secret agents show up and surround the place, making him even more twitchy. Abel drops the news that Lee's maid is actually a high-ranking spy. In fact, she's basically the head of the kingdom's intelligence agency. He mentions that a group called the Reapers is trying to infiltrate the tournament to cause some chaos. They want to kill off the noble families, and Abel thanks Ray for protecting his brother, Reds, who is the club leader. The girls tell Ray he can trust Reds to do the heavy lifting for the investigation, and they tell him to keep his eyes peeled for anything that looks suspicious. Even with the stress, Lyra gives Ray permission to use his real magic if things get ugly. He says sure, and later in his room, he vows that he won't let some cultists hurt his friends. Next day at the tournament, Rebecca wins her match and moves to the finals, which shocks exactly nobody. While watching the show, Ray gets pulled aside by Clarice and Alyssa, who say Amelia is acting weird. She's been locked in her room all night, and they think she's having a crisis. Ray takes the hint and goes to stand outside her door to give her a piece of his mind. He shouts through the wood that he was scared of her at first, but now he wants to help. He admits he thought he'd just hurt people by getting close, but now he wants to actually know the real her. He knows she's hiding something juicy, and he's not leaving until she spills the tea. After a long silence, she finally lets him in and they have a talk. She rants about her life, saying she's a noble but she feels like a total fraud inside. She says her whole existence is just a list of expectations and it's a lot of pressure. Compared to his war trauma, her problems seem pretty small and pathetic. Amelia admits she's still struggling and feels like she's stuck in a gilded cage. She says she has no freedom and has no reason to actually keep waking up, since her whole life is just a lie made up to make the Rose family look good. Amelia felt like she was drowning in her own life and had no reason to exist. The protagonist walked over and explained that you don't actually need a reason to exist. Life doesn't come with an instruction manual or a deep justification. You just make up your own reasons as you go along. Fear, joy, and sadness are all just tools to help you move to the next day. Plus, she has a group of friends who would literally follow her into a fire. And that should be enough for anyone to keep going. He told her he'd stay by her side forever, which made her feel a lot better about herself. Amelia's heart felt all warm and fuzzy, and she kept holding Ray's hand while he thought about their duel. He remembered how she looked when she was trying to kill him, and it was actually inspiring. So Ray decided he trusts her more than anyone else in the room. Next day, they all showed up for the big tournament fight. Alyssa and Evie were having a totally different experience than what actually happened in reality. But that's a problem for a different day. Ray walked up to Amelia and gave her a rose to wear, wishing her some good luck. She gave him a shy smile and then headed out to the arena for the main event. Meanwhile, Ray ran into a guy named Conquista, who said a noble's daughter and some other kids have gone completely missing. He told everyone the priority is the match between Amelia and Arian for some reason. Arian pulls out her sword and starts using her weird magic punch ability to start things off. She hits Amelia twice and sends her flying back toward the edge of the platform. Then Arian charges in again for the kill. Her eyes turn blood red and she explodes in a massive cloud of pink glitter. Once the dust clears, Amelia is surrounded by magic butterflies and says she's not going down yet. Meanwhile, Ray goes into the basement and finds Clarice surrounded by a bunch of passed-out dudes. He helps her wake up and then realizes the whole room is a giant trip. Everything is a hallucination because the magic in the air is way too strong. The whole place is basically a magical haunted house at this point. The protagonist spotted the creeps closing in and decided the best move was to carry Clarice like a backpack while unlocking his real power and shutting down the Chronos keys. He started swinging ice swords at everyone at once, but one of the cultists cast a spell that basically turned out the lights for the whole room. Our guy didn't panic, he just took a deep breath. He whipped out an antimatter trick mixed with a blizzard tornado, which completely deleted every bit of magic the sect was trying to use. The blast was so overkill that it even messed with the duel between Amelia and Arian happening upstairs. With their magic broken, the villains tried to bail, but he just flash froze the floor and turned them into human ice cubes. That's when Reds finally showed up to give him a pat on the back for not letting the basement explode. He promised he'd handle the cleanup and the paperwork. The protagonist thanked him and sprinted off to find Amelia, still hauling Clarice around like luggage. Back in the arena, Amelia was actually starting to win. So Arian decided it was time to stop playing nice and use her trump card. She maxed out her mana and built a literal lightning storm in the middle of the room, while Amelia's dad watched like a proud, scary noble. Amelia tried her usual butterfly bombs, but Arian was moving like she'd just drunk 10 espressos, dodging every single explosion with ease. One solid hit sent Amelia flying into the air, making the crowd think the underdog story was officially over. Even though she was beat up, Amelia crawled back to her feet because she was way too stubborn to quit now. The protagonist yelled at her, reminding her of that late-night therapy session they had about finding a reason to exist. And that was the spark she needed to finally let all her power off the leash. The whole room started glowing, and she was suddenly surrounded by a literal swarm of magic butterflies. She told Arian that touching even one of them would trigger a butterfly effect she really wasn't going to enjoy. Arian got pissed and tried to rush her, but every attack she threw just randomly veered off course like it had a mind of its own. It was as if Amelia's magic was literally rewriting the script of the fight in real time. Carol was geeking out in the stands because she'd never seen magic that actually reflected a person's soul so perfectly before. The two of them just kept swinging at each other. Arian wouldn't back down, and Amelia was starting to bleed from the sheer effort of existing. Our guy was starting to get worried that his friend was going to accidentally explode her own heart. After trading some heavy blows, they both decided to bet it all on one final massive clash. Amelia came out on top, and once the dust settled, Arian actually showed some class and admitted she'd been outplayed. Amelia thanked her squad, especially the protagonist, calling him her biggest inspiration and the only reason she was still standing. They finally made up for lost time, and Pinky swore to be best friends again, just like they were when they were kids. The crowd went absolutely wild cheering for Amelia. She was officially the rookie champion of the entire Magic tournament. Later on, our guy went to check on her while she was getting patched up in the infirmary. He told her she did a great job, and she admitted that his brutal training was the only reason she didn't lose her head. She offered a handshake, and despite her hand being a mess of bandages, she felt like she finally had a life worth living. While Linya was busy asking questions, Rebecca was back at home looking like she was having a bad trip. Her eyes were literally bleeding. She couldn't stop seeing the war and those weird crystals that showed her the protagonist's tragic childhood memories. Her sister Maria walked in looking worried, but Rebecca tried to play it cool. She told Maria that if she's going to get married, she should at least do it for love instead of a business deal. She locked herself in her room to cry, while Maria remembered how everyone bullied Rebecca as a kid for her white hair and red eyes. Even though people were constant jerks to her, the protagonist always had her sister's back through the thick and thin. Maria was the only person who actually understood what she was going through. Since her parents were clearly embarrassed by her, Maria realized the engagement was a total scam and decided she wasn't just going to sit there and watch her sister's life get ruined. She was already cooking up a rescue plan. A few days later, the protagonist was watching the class get ready for the big festival. Everything was looking good, and the girls were all dressed up in their fancy outfits. He gave everyone a compliment and hung out for a bit, just trying to enjoy a rare moment of not being shot at. When the bell rang, he walked with Rebecca as they headed out of the academy gates. He asked her why she was moving out of the dorms already. Rebecca explained that being engaged meant she had to grow up fast and leave the school behind as soon as the party was over. She was basically going to be a prisoner in her fiancé's house. That's when Evans showed up looking like a creep to collect his prize. The protagonist introduced himself to the guy, who thanked him for being a good escort before taking Rebecca away. He let them go, but he couldn't stop thinking about how Dina mentioned the guy was a total weirdo with 0 red flags because he had no flags at all. Reds showed up a minute later and dragged the protagonist to a secret meeting with the principal and the rest of the girls. They started comparing notes on what they'd found out about the groom-to-be. Turns out Evans lives in a literal ghost house with no servants and no signs of life, which is a bit of a deal-breaker. But he shows up to every social event just to make sure people think he's normal. The principal was sure he was a cultist, and she figured out his master plan pretty quickly. Evans was literally just a collector of magic eyes. And we see him at Rebecca's place staring at her eyes while wearing a mask and telling his cult buddies that the clock is ticking. He's waiting for her to use her power so he can open some mystical door and finally fulfill his evil promise. Meanwhile, Rebecca was crying in her room over her life choices, remembering how Evans blackmailed her dad into the marriage just so he could be the richest guy in the kingdom. And if she didn't play along, her sister Maria was going to get hurt. She had another flashback of the protagonist trying to heal her while people were dying all around them. Lydia showed up back then and smacked the boy, telling him he needs to realize he's in a war and not a playground. He had to learn that the real world is a cold and brutal place. The next day, Rebecca was questioning her own sanity after seeing those memories. She wondered if she was seeing her past life, and then Dina called the protagonist out for a secret meeting. Maria showed up and said she's noticed Rebecca has been acting like a zombie lately, and she's really worried about her. She begged the protagonist to help because she's the only one who can fix this. He grabbed her hands and promised he'd keep Rebecca safe no matter what. He swore he'd do everything in his power to make sure she's okay. Maria was so relieved she gave him a hug, but Rebecca was watching from the bushes looking confused. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep because she thought the protagonist was plotting something with her brother. Meanwhile, the main character was just chilling in his room reading a book. Evie asked what the story was about, and he said it's about a demon girl who lived alone until she met a human. She had no clue how to be a person, but eventually she started to feel things like love and sadness. The boy eventually left because he was scared of his own powers, leaving the girl to wait for him forever while realizing she was in love. Evie thought the story was a bit of a downer, and he admitted it was messing with his head too. He started thinking about Hotwa's funeral again, but Rebecca's voice kept popping into his head. He went to talk to her in his dream, and she asked who he really was under the mask. He woke up before he could answer, feeling like a total failure. And then he realized his eye was bleeding again, which is never a good sign. Next morning, he ran into Rebecca during his workout because the plot demanded it. She wanted to know about his dreams, but then she got shy and they just talked about the festival instead. The party finally started, and a bunch of kids from other schools showed up to join the fun. Rebecca and her sister thought the classroom decorations were actually pretty decent for once, and everyone was obsessed with the protagonist's Lynn White drag costume. He was flirting with Maria and giving her compliments, making every other girl in the room super jealous. Amelia was especially annoyed because the protagonist was actually a better-looking woman than she was. He eventually took the wig off and told Rebecca to just have a good time for once. They spent the whole day laughing and acting like normal kids until it got dark outside. Rebecca wanted to ask him to watch the fireworks the next night, but she chickened out and just said bye. Maria was walking home when she saw a white-haired woman who looked exactly like her mirror image. The woman told her that Rebecca was about to die and they needed to fix it right now. Meanwhile, the protagonist was with Leigh and the principal, who confirmed that Rebecca's life was officially on the line. He jumped up, ready to go fight someone because that's what he's best at. Then Rebecca's dad showed up and said he's the only one who can save his daughter with his ice magic. That night, Evans and his cult were getting ready for their big ritual. They were finally going to get the power they'd been killing people for. Some guy named the Dragon was there, and he only wanted to eat ice sorcerers for breakfast. Rebecca was suffering in her room, seeing her own funeral while Maria listened to her scream. The next morning, Rebecca told the protagonist to watch over Maria after she's gone with her new husband. He promised to protect her and acted like he didn't know the whole wedding was an evil trap. He met up with the principal and Carol and realized it was finally time to pull the trigger on their plan. Rebecca was walking down the street when Evans intercepted her, and they both vanished into thin air. The festival kept going like everything was fine, even though the main character was gone. He'd been talking to Maria under his disguise, and then he set off to save the day. As soon as the talk was over, he vanished into the shadows to hunt down Evans. She ran into her squad along the way, thinking back to the secret meeting she had with them just the night before. Meanwhile, Rebecca opened her eyes in a totally strange room and immediately panicked. Evans walked up to her, announcing that the big show was finally starting and she needed to be ready. Downstairs, a whole group of those cult weirdos was waiting. They had a small army of monsters with them, just sitting there waiting for Ray to show his face. He actually arrived right on time, but nobody noticed him because his transformation spell was on point. He took one look at the sheer number of monsters and realized this wasn't going to be a quick fight. Then a magic butterfly fluttered past his nose, which was a signal that the cavalry had arrived. It was Albert and Clarice showing up to actually do something useful for once. Evie reminded the protagonist that they were all in this together and they weren't going to leave him hanging. The whole group teamed up, using their unique abilities to start wiping those monsters off the map. The protagonist moved in just in time to save Amelia's life. Some creep from the cult was about to jump her and drain her magic like a vampire. The guy was legitimately confused when he realized the girl didn't even have enough magic to be a snack. One of the cultists told him to go upstairs and help Evans, while Amelia told Ray to go save Rebecca, promising that the squad could handle the monster trash down here. He said thanks and immediately ditched the disguise, sprinting toward the final boss room. As he ran, he kept thinking about what Rebecca's dad told him about the ancient curse rotting their family tree. It all started with some old-school genocide involving a thing called Cruz. This entity pops up every 100 years to try and hijack Rebecca's body, and Ilya explained it was only happening because Rebecca's magic was leaking. Since she couldn't control it, Cruz had an easy way in, and her dad mentioned Maria's white hair was basically a warning sign that the curse was coming for both of them. After hearing all that depressing family history, the protagonist felt even more motivated to make sure Rebecca didn't get possessed by some ancient ghost. Back in the boss room, the dragon guy and a masked man finally showed up to claim their prize. The guy took off the mask and shocker, it was Evans the whole time. The white-haired lady who had been creeping on Maria earlier suddenly changed her face. Evans started crying about how she'd been manipulating him for 10 years while he was stuck in the kingdom's basement. But he announced that today the script was changing. He tried to blast her with magic because he wasn't going to let her use Rebecca for her own weird experiments. Evans got shoved into a white dimension, which made him even angrier because she was always 2 steps ahead of his plans. The lady then turned to Maria, already knowing what the girl was going to do after their little chat. Right then, the protagonist burst in and recognized the dragon that liked to eat sorcerers for breakfast. The dragon tried to charge him, but slammed into an invisible wall like a bird hitting a window. The lady called herself the liar sorceress and told everyone that Lee needed to take over the situation. She admitted she made a deal with Rebecca's dad to hold back the curse by connecting her magic to Ray's. The plan was to wait for her to overheat and then use the Chrono's keys to lock everything down forever. The dragon guy broke the glass, so Leah told the protagonist to handle him while she went into the void to fight Evans. He agreed and turned off his limiter, letting his ice power flood the room so he could start the fight. Meanwhile, Leah jumped into the white void with Evans, who was so tilted he tried to use the dark triad technique to make himself look scarier. Leigh just laughed because she knew that move only makes people more mentally unstable and easier to hit. Evans tried to lunge at her, but she just turned him into a giant popsicle instantly. She used her special move to create a pillar of pure energy that stripped him of all his borrowed powers. A few seconds later, he was back to being a normal, pathetic human who couldn't believe how strong she was. But she told him that Ray was actually the strongest one here and could probably take over the world if he wasn't so nice. Amelia and her crew finished cleaning up the monsters downstairs and were celebrating until a bunch of even bigger, darker monsters showed up. They were getting ready for round 2 when a rain of ice swords saved their hides. The 4 main sorceresses finally arrived on the scene to help the kids out. They apologized for being late and started nuking every monster in sight like they were playing a video game. Carla used light magic to delete them, and Abby summoned a bunch of fire snakes to make things go boom. Carol used her illusion powers to wipe out a group, and Lydia dropped an ice bomb that almost took out the building. Abby had to throw up a shield just so the students didn't get caught in the friendly fire. Meanwhile, the main character was still fighting the dragon guy, who had finally revealed his true, ugly soul-eating form. Rebecca tried to help, but her brother told her to shut up because she was the reason he was so miserable. The protagonist got grabbed by the throat and decided it was time to use a secret forbidden technique. His aura turned blood red as he used red ice to freeze the guy's feet and then activated Pandora's power to end the fight for good. He turned his limiter back on and then just fell over because he was completely out of juice. Rebecca tried to run to him, but Maria blocked her path and said this whole disaster was their own fault. Rebecca reminded her that she'd spent her whole life protecting her from the world. But Maria shouted that she never asked for a bodyguard and she was tired of being treated like a burden instead of a sister. She said she only did those things so she wouldn't just be some side character in Rebecca's tragic life story. That made Rebecca break down in tears, and her magic started to go nuclear, creating a giant dome of energy. The protagonist stood up and told her that Evans was just a puppet for a demon who ruined his life. He realized this whole story sounded familiar and decided to go into the dome after her. He told Maria to stay back and promised that he was going to bring her sister home. Rebecca apologized for all her lies and for not telling him how she really felt about him. He just grabbed her face and told her it was fine because everyone has a closet full of skeletons. He gave her a kiss and then used the Chrono's keys to freeze her magic before she could turn into a bomb. A few days later, he was standing at Hotwa's grave, thinking about how he actually survived a whole semester of magic school. After his friend died back then, he'd been wandering in the dark until his teacher pointed him toward the door and told him to go see the world. Even though he was still a weirdo with a dark past, he finally had a group of friends who liked him anyway. And that's the end of this crazy story.